that came up to see what we were doing because the call was for people with cameras, made by an attorney, Netta Ledgerwood, who is the attorney for the local bar association, who is in charge of all the minors council. And minors council are what we wrote about today in the Davis Vanguard. That is when a family court judge appoints an attorney for your child who is at the center of a divorce, a custody, or a domestic dispute. And they become your child's attorney, and they are paid either with taxpayer dollars or by the parents in the case. So Netta Ledgerwood has been appointed to represent lots of children. She's also a member of the local bar association, and the local bar association has a panel of attorneys that are qualified to represent children. But that's just for Santa Clara County. And so we're looking into the fairness of access to attorneys that might not charge what Netta does to be in this big expensive building. We're looking at taxpayer money that goes to pay for these attorneys. So I've written an article in the Davis Vanguard, and that is published as of this morning. I came to Ms. Ledgerwood's office to ask her if she had a comment about it, because our next article is going to be about the taxpayer waste used on these court-appointed attorneys. So what happens is when a judge decides that, and they just make it up, they decide, oh, this kid needs an attorney. They then say the parents have to pay them or taxpayers have to pay them. And when they say taxpayers have to pay them, the attorneys, either way, have to file an application and say how many hours they've worked on the case. If they're paid by the parents, they get paid their open rate, meaning they could charge anywhere from $250 to $1,200 an hour. And if they're paid by taxpayers, they're only paid $100 an hour. But the judges don't ever really review those billings. They just grant them. They appoint the attorneys, that's giving them employment, and then they're allowing your tax dollars to pay for these attorneys. There are no job descriptions for this job. There are no requirements. There are no benchmarks, and there's no way to measure that they've done any good in a case. And they can talk about, they can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on these attorneys for a few children, and then the courts are turning around and saying, oh, we don't have any money to provide court reporters for everyone. And that's what my article was about today. It was about minors counsel, how there's no accountability, very little transparency. Netta Ledgerwood, I came to ask her about the article I published this morning and the next one, and she didn't even give 30 seconds before she slammed the door. I didn't even give my name. At least Travis Whitfield heard my name before he slammed the door. So these attorneys that are making money, both privately and by taxpayers, don't want to talk about what they're doing to represent children. They don't want to talk about how the public good is served by them representing a few children at the expenses of us not having court reporters. Whoever said, you seem like the kind of person who would 24-hour release, no cash bail, vehicular homicide like NYC does. I assure you that I will have a no bail, like Christine Miller. So you can say whatever it seems like I am. I'm a reporter. I'm reporting on these issues. If you're interested, watch them. If you're not, you can bounce over to another platform. We are going to continue to report on minors counsel and how your taxpayer dollars are going to this, because every attorney that is appointed as minors counsel has extraordinary power and very little accountability and less transparency. And every single one of those attorneys affects anybody who is going through the court system, because they're using our resources, they're acting unethically, and there's no checks and balances on it. And we've been getting all the records on this, and the attorneys that are getting these lucrative appointments, often paid with taxpayer dollars, don't want to talk about what they're doing or why it's important. So if they're doing it for public service and to represent children, why would they not want to talk about that and what it looks like? They also have no responsibility to show any outcome. So imagine we pay people as a constitutional right, we pay people to have an attorney if they're charged with a crime. And yet when we have children whose parents are going through a divorce, there's no constitutional right for representation for them or for the parents that are going through the case. But these family court judges are kicking back all of these appointments to attorneys that can charge parents $400, $500, $600 an hour to read all the papers in their case, to talk to their child's therapists, schools, friends, interview people. They can investigate like they're little investigative journalists, and they're supposed to report to the court, but we find they're just not doing that. Instead, it's a big crony club. And we always talk about that big club that we're not in it. Minors Council is leading the way. So we're going to continue to get public records on how much this is costing taxpayers. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. We're going to continue to get those records. We're going to continue to ask attorneys for comment, because attorneys have a right to simply say no comment. But if they are taking appointments in the name of public service and getting paid taxpayer dollars, then the public probably has a right to financial and other information, just like we do with other public officials and employees that are paid with public funds. And so when we see a police officer engaged in certain conduct, I can go to Transparent California and I can look up their salary. When we see a public court judge making rulings that we question or we think there's an appearance, we can look at their 700 forms and see what investments they have and if they have conflicts of interest. We can do that with local politicians. The only people we can't do that with are these attorneys that are just getting these cash cow appointments and churning their fees over and over again, tens of thousands of dollars, and remaining in cases for years. So we're going to start to talk about how long these attorneys stay in a case, and if they're so helpful, why do they need to be in a case that long? And we're also going to talk about how much money this is costing families and taxpayers, and what the public good of these appointments are, because they're getting out of control. And the family court judges are the ones that come to these lunches that people like Netta Ledgerwood, she hosts those parties for the judges. We talked about that last week. There was a big holiday booze and hors d'oeuvres, holiday swag party for the judges and the attorneys. And then they start getting appointments magically from these judges. In my article, we also talked about the disproportionate rate in which these attorneys are appointed. It is, whoever said it sounds like guardianship, it is exactly like guardianship, because these attorneys are conserving your children. They're making decisions and recommendations about your children, and they're influencing a judge. So these attorneys are going to influence where your children live, where they go to school, how often they see their parents, if they can see extended families, and they're often doing that with public funds. And we have to start looking at why we want them doing that. I honestly thought that Netta Ledgerwood would speak to me. She's in a position of leadership in Minors Council here in Santa Clara County, and she didn't even let me get my name out when she slammed her door and called security on us. And so security is waiting in the wings here for us to finish this live stream, and we need to start asking why these attorneys are slamming their doors, calling security, calling the police, and not wanting to talk about the public money that they're getting. So we're going to keep talking about it. We're going to talk about how much money it is, and we're going to talk about what the attorneys are doing with it. We're going to continue to report on this, because in my view, Minors Council is the gateway to all the problems in the family courts. And when we have transparency and accountability for that, then we will have it everywhere in the family courts. But we're going to go for the Minors Council, and we're going to start naming names, showing faces, and showing how these individuals react when we knock on their door. So that's our live for today. I'll have another video dropping late tonight, a short, and then we'll also have a longer video for tomorrow. And we are following the money, and we're following it through public records, because remember, they are not posting this information anywhere in the public. You can't get it unless you request it. I will say a cute little story too. Before Netta Ledgerwood, Jessica Huey was in charge of the Minors Council panel here in Santa Clara County. And she had, during that time period where she was in charge, 240 appointments. And that could have been for 1 to 3 children. So let's just double it. On average, she had 2 children. That means she had over 500 children in a 6-year period that she was representing the best interests of. And largely, she and her partner were being paid with taxpayer dollars. Gamble and Huey is a law firm that we see the records in. We also see Netta Ledgerwood's name in those records where the public is paying these individuals. So the highest paid attorney was Kathy Schlepphorst, who made over $600,000 being a minors counsel appointment over a few-year period, as she was also on the board of the Domestic Violence Intervention Coalition and doing some little funny backdoor scenes with those DV cases. And then we have Kathleen Dong. She is a minors counsel who received $80,000 in one case for one appointment. And you have to ask, what is an attorney representing children in a divorce or child custody case doing to justify an $80,000 payment? And to give you a point of reference, if you're charged with a crime and you can't afford to pay your attorney, you have a constitutional right to appointment of counsel. And in Santa Clara County, we have a fee schedule of how much we will pay those attorneys. And the highest we will pay is $250,000 for a felony death penalty case. That means to be defended and not go to prison for the rest of your life or to be subject to the death penalty, your attorney is only going to make $250,000. Now we have Kathleen Dong in one divorce case making $80,000. There's no cap on this money, and they keep cashing the checks, and the taxpayers are writing it, signed by the judges. So we're going to keep reporting on this because you need to know how judges are wasting your money and how attorneys are letting them. So this is what our reporting is going to focus on this week.